So I guess to speak briefly to the 4 slides that we just skimmed through, they are in your packet. I suspect that there may be some questions related to those, and we'll certainly be more than glad to address those later on in the presentation or after the presentation. Just suffice to say that there was a lot of discussion through the Restore Advisory Committee and with the county, trying to align those needs that were identified in the first document with all of the categories that were eligible for Restore dollars and projects that might come forward, and then ultimately trying to develop a process that we could go through and rank those projects and evaluate those projects against those needs and against those criteria. That's ultimately what that list is intended to do. There was also a scoring mechanism that was attached to that. That goes into a scoring rubric that we've been working with the committee on. There was a lot of back and forth about how to weight things, and some of the last elements of that process are going to take place at the May 4th meeting, because a reconsideration of certain categories and how much they're weighted and how much they're fully represented in those criteria are going to be addressed by the Restore Advisory Committee based on the Board of County Commissioners' recommendations. So if you all are interested in knowing more about that process and exactly what the resulting scoring rubric comes out to be, please look to attend that meeting. It will be in the County Board of County Commission chambers on May 4. Also, to talk a little bit, I think a little bit about context for the next few slides. Where Dewberry has a very specific role in this overall process. We were hired by the county to assist the Restore Advisory Committee and the county staff in basically the implementation of the process. So we bring forward recommendations. Dewberry is not by any means the driving force of this, these final decisions. Final decisions are being made by the Restore Advisory Committee, by county staff, and then ultimately being brought forward to the Board of County Commissioners, where they are discussing and advising and then finally adopting the process as it moves forward. So it's very much a community-driven process. We've tried very hard to reach out and engage a lot of different public comment up to this point, and we expect that we will continue to do so. So please look forward to those upcoming meetings and attend and make your wishes known if you see something in the process that isn't going the direction that you think it should be. It is an opportunity for the public to get engaged. Looking forward then to the project submission process, as we are codifying the final stages of the selection criteria and the point scoring system, we will next be looking to develop or opening the public portal. That will be the first opportunity for the public to bring forward their project submissions for consideration by the RAC and ultimately by the Board of County Commissioners. So that's going to take I guess the image of a website, and there will be an application that will be put forward for persons to fill out on the website. You can also download it and fill it out at your leisure, and then come back and fill it out online after you've got everything basically fully developed and you've thought through all of the various questions. And we certainly encourage people to do that. There will also be public workshops to talk more about both the application process, how to fill it out online. If you're not able to get access to online portal, then you can bring it to the county, you could submit it to Dewberry, various ways to make sure that we're reaching the broadest sector of the public through this process. And then we'll also be talking about that application itself. What are the things that are important about that application? How do you bring forward and highlight your project elements the best way that you possibly can to make your project highly considered by the Restore Advisory Committee and ultimately by the Board of County Commissioners. We anticipate right now, and not all of this has been written down and finalized yet, we're going through that process with the Advisory Committee now, that Dewberry will assist the county staff and the advisory committee to evaluate all those projects and rank and score them. Ultimately, the advisory committee will be coming forward with their ranking and scoring of projects that they will be making a recommendation to the Board of County Commissioners. At that point, the Board of County Commissioners will be then evaluating everything that's been brought forward, both through the ranking and scoring process, as well as evaluating the projects themselves to whatever degree that they choose to do so. The final selection of projects that will be brought forward through the multi-year implementation plan will be this choice of the Board of County Commissioners. Everything up to that point are recommendations and working through the process so that they don't have to be involved in that part of it. The ultimate decision, though, will rely with them. I guess talking about the submittal process, we've talked briefly about some of the criteria that will need to be brought forward as part of the submittal application. We're going to talk a little bit more about that in later sessions today. We do have kind of a draft application to go through. It is by no means a representation of the full application that we required for our project, but it'll at least get you thinking along the lines of the types of information that you'll need to prepare. And then again, to highlight the item that Jennifer had mentioned, that the submitters of the application will not necessarily be the same group that will implement the project. It doesn't mean that they can't be, but they're two separate processes. You submit projects for consideration, and then projects go through the full process. If that project ultimately gets selected for implementation, there'll be another procurement process by the county. So to talk a little bit about the ranking process, there is, sorry about that. Really the main thing is to look at your project and as best you can align it with the eligible criteria for Restore. That's what the committee is going to be looking for. That's what Dewberry is going to be looking for in our review process. So understanding those 11 eligible criteria and understanding how your project interleaves with one or more of those processes and promotes that a benefit to the community is really what we're all going to be looking for as the evaluation process and trying to get a highly ranked and scored project. It is something of note that the Board of County Commissioners did decide that they wanted to have all projects scored against all criteria. That's important because it means that projects that meet multiple criteria and look to leverage one criteria or one element of one criteria against another to come up with a twofold or threefold benefit is definitely going to be something that you need to look for. Those are going to be highly ranked projects. Projects that are singularly focused, it may end up being highly ranked in a particular category, but in the end it may not be selected as one of the projects to be carried forward if a project is focused solely on tourism or focused solely on the environment, and it doesn't have other elements that lift its score accordingly. I guess as I noted, the ranking process is still ongoing, so we have a little bit more to go there, but most of that is represented. There's a few tweaks that we expect to happen on May 4, but most of it's represented in your packet. And then once we get to I guess also to address the ranking process, we anticipate that the portal is going to be open in June, July timeframe. We haven't settled on a final date yet. Right now, based on our discussions with county, we're looking at the portal being open for 45 days. And we then expect that all projects, once that cutoff date has been reached, will be evaluated, be brought together. They're all going to be managed in a database, all be evaluated by the RAC. That process is likely going to take a few months to go through and finalize a list to carry forward to the Board of County Commissioners. So therefore, we expect that list would be going up to the board sometime in the fall of this year. As the board then evaluates that list and they make their decisions, that's likely to take another few months. During that time period, we will be working on the finalization of the multi-year plan. The multi-year plan is, it's answering very specific questions that are required by Treasury about the process that we've gone through. It's also documenting a lot of information about the public outreach process and the involvement of the public, what the RAC did and what their involvement was, and ultimately how the Board of County Commissioners is moving forward with the list of projects. The other important component of that is the actual selection of projects and the alignment of those projects with the needs of this community to show how each one of those projects will address one or more needs, and it aligns with the eligibility criteria, because ultimately that's what the Treasury is going to be evaluating when they receive that document. We expect that that's going to be sometime spring of 2016, hopefully looking at February, March timeframe at this point, that we'll have a final list of projects, a final multi-year implementation plan that will be submitted to Treasury. At that point, we're looking forward to probably a few months of Treasury evaluation and then responding with their comments. Depending on what their comments are, they may choose to approve a slate of projects and come back for others, or they may say, no, you've got to modify and update and provide more information, and then we'll go through and approve them all at one time. We're unsure. They haven't really defined how that process is going to work. But ultimately, I would anticipate summer of 2016, we're going to have another procurement process that was identified for these projects. At that point, that'll be the first point at which the actual process of the development of the full application for that project and the full funding gets submitted back to Treasury and then approved to move forward with the project implementation. So if you can envision a beach renourishment project or a downtown improvement project that might be coming forward, there's a long time between the conception of that project now and how that all moves forward. We need to really develop that concept today. We need to understand what the potential benefits are, but then there'll be another opportunity in the spring of 2016 to go through and actually work out all the details of that project. What exactly will it do? How many miles of sidewalk will be built? How many neighborhoods will be affected by it? What's going to be the exact economic impact of that project? All of those things will have basically a twofold opportunity to be defined. Once now, to the best of your ability, project what those things are, and then again in the future when the project gets selected to basically go through and do all the hard details and work out that information for final approval by Treasury. So Treasury requirements, to speak I guess briefly to some of those. We have best available science. That's pretty much their highest mantra of this whole process. So look to include that as part of your application process. Look to identify what resources are out there now that show a linkage between what you're proposing to do and what your proposed benefits are, so that ultimately that can be justified as part of the application process. Financial reporting is going to be a big component of this, and that's frankly one of the reasons why we're having this meeting, is that we understand that there's going to be a variety of different capacities of folks who have dealt with grants, who've not dealt with grants. The Board of County Commissioners is taking, I would say, a rather gingerly step into the process of considering whether or not they're going to have any type of a partnering process through these grant monies that flow to the county. And exactly what that looks like, we're not quite sure yet. But just recognize that if you're a group that hasn't looked at or hasn't been through a very rigorous process for supporting how grant monies have flowed through and been implemented in your organization, then you may be looking at opportunities to team with others who have been through that process.
And you might have it's federal grant.
Yes.
And that,
okay. Yeah, and federal grant monies it's going to be a vastly different process, and the county is actually looking at, for all the grants that they have administered, they're looking at staffing up. They're looking at bringing in additional administrative folks and additional process managers and everything just to address this process. So it is going to be a pretty rigorous process. And that's, part of the reason for having this discussion today. The auditing, record retention, I think the biggest issue there is to recognize that Treasury has never administered this type of a process through federal grants before. They've always been the doorkeeper, they've always been the watcher, and now they're in charge of the money. So we expect that while we always knew it was a rigorous process, this may be maybe even a step above what it has been in the past, as far as how they watch the process unfold. And I guess funds flowing beyond Escambia County, like I said, we're working through that right now. There are specific requirements that are identified in the standards, terms and agreements that have come from Treasury as to what can be done. The utilization of subrecipients and subawards through this process is allowable, but it is solely up to the local community as to how they administer that process. So some of that is defined, and more of it is actually how it will be addressed in Escambia County is yet to be fully determined. So the bottom of the list, again, conflicts of interest, standards of conduct, make sure that you've addressed those types of issues as you start looking at what teaming partners you might be considering looking to get with, because those are certainly things that the county will be looking at also. And then lastly, additional resources. There's a ton of information out there on the internet right now about Restore, specifically about Component 1, and all the criteria, the guidelines for the applications, et cetera. Rest assured, we've gone through all that process. We've evaluated all that information in our process, bringing that information then back to the county and to the Restore Advisory Committee in what we have been trying to codify as part of the process. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't go in and evaluate that to the best degree that you can to understand how it might benefit you, to understand all those individual elements and what elements you might be able to pull out and identify where can I leverage, where can I bring my knowledge of what it is that I need to do in my local community against something that's represented in one of these guideline documents that makes my application that much better. So with that, I think we're open for a brief round of questions.
Yes, sir. In regards to the selection process, I noticed you said that the Dewberry group will do the ranking and scoring. However, it goes to the county commissioners to make the final selection. So is it possible if the Dewberry gives an individual agency a decent score, the county commission could just deny it?
Well, I guess first a point of clarification. Dewberry will be assisting in that process. Ultimately, the Restore Advisory Committee will be making the recommendations that are carried forward to the Board of County Commissioners. So we will not bring forward a slate of projects from our process that says these are the ones we think are best qualified. That's not our role in this process. We'll be working with the county staff and with the Restore Advisory Committee to pull the projects together, to organize them, to sort them through, to do evaluations of certain technical criteria so that we can provide that information to the advisory committee. Ultimately, then the advisory committee will select their project slate and bring it forward to the Board of County Commissioners. Right now, we don't really know if they're going to be ranking them as in 1, 2, 3, 4, or if they're going to just bring forward the top 30 and say these are the best projects out of all that were submitted. But however that process carries forward, the Board of County Commissioners then, yes, they will have the list of all projects that were submitted. And if they look at, let's say, for instance, they choose the top 30 process to go with, they look at the top 30 and they say, well, we like these projects, but we really like 33 down here, and we really like this one down at the very bottom for whatever reason. They have the option to remove and replace projects at that point. And ultimately, it will be their determination of what projects get implemented. I don't know that there'll be a recourse at that point if your project was originally identified and then it gets dropped out for some reason in the first round of implementation. But that's another important point I want to bring forward. This isn't a one-and-done scenario. We've got a long list of opportunities for money to flow into this community, and we have a long opportunity for those projects that were identified in the first round to be carried forward that weren't funded into the second round, into the third round, and so on. While we have the Transocean monies in the coffer right now ready to be spent, and they're simply waiting on this multi-year plan to be done to move through that process. As Stella mentioned, we've got BP monies that are flowing in, and we expect that while it's not really identified in law yet, that likely those monies from BP will flow in over a series of years. It likely won't be one big lump, one big lump that comes in at one time. So that, I think right now the county staff is envisioning multiple rounds of multi-year plans where each time that they develop a multi-year plan, they go through their first highest list of funding projects. Then those that didn't get funded get carried on to the next round. There's an opportunity for more projects to come in. Then there's a reevaluation of those projects based on how the needs have changed in the community. Because as these projects get implemented, certain needs are going to be addressed. Other needs might arise that weren't previously addressed. Okay. So there'll be an opportunity to go through this multiple rounds.
Okay. I have another question along the same lines.
Just on that one second.
Mm-hmm. I'll clarify that you also asked if the agency is not selected.
Yes.
Just as a reminder, there are no agencies that are applying here. These are just ideas. So no agencies are being selected at all in this round.
Exactly.
Just idea. The other thing, I heard you mention that even though my project may score high and it may make it to the county commissioners, my idea may not be implemented by me.
Correct. So
how does that work?
Well, it's part of the reason why we're trying to get this group together today is to understand that process. As Jennifer mentioned, there's going to be a two-stage process. Projects come in, they're evaluated. At the end, once projects are identified for funding, then there's another procurement process. And at that point, what we're hoping is going to occur is that you will have persons who are professionals at doing the actual implementation of a project. Say, for instance, if it's a park project, then you're going to have landscape architects, engineers that are involved in coming forward and proposing to do that project. And that'll go through the standard procurement process that the county has. What we hope is going to also occur is that those same professionals will look back to the people who brought forward those project ideas and look to include them in their teams. Because ultimately that's the pathway for the original applicant to be involved in the process. If you're not an engineer, if you're not an architect, if you don't have the capacity to implement a project, but you think that you have something to offer to the implementer of the project as far as how it best can be done, then we're hoping that that teaming relationship occurs during that procurement process. And that's going to be through just getting the information out, making it publicly known, and making folks like you all understand that there's another step of outreach, there's another step of communication with teaming partners beyond today to look for, can I be part of that implementation team in the future?
Basically, you're saying partnership, partnership, partnership.
Yes, sir.
Next, we have a question right here.
My question actually was very much to the second element of that gentleman's question, and I'm wondering, in terms of preserving your intellectual properties for those agencies and individuals who do invest a lot of their knowledge in the planning process, can there be any sort of a sole source provider status that would be applied for specific intellectual properties that are part of the original proposal?
There's been some discussion about that at the Restore Advisory Committee level and with the county. At this point, there is no provision for that. I would say that it's a little early in the process to say whether or not there will be a provision made for that as part of the process. We're hoping that everyone is looking towards what is going to benefit the community in the best possible way, and to bring forward projects that represent that. Given that there is no process in place right now that does any protection of intellectual property, it's going to be up to the applicant to determine how they can best represent their ideas if they really want to have them implemented and they want to assist the county in this process, and still protect the ownership of what it is that they have in mind at that time. Maybe perhaps the best way would be to develop that partnership early on with that eventual procurement partner that it needs to take place in the spring of 2016, and work with that group to identify the best way to represent the concept without giving away the meat of how to implement it. It's a delicate balance, but right now there is no represented process by which that can be done.
Back here. Oh, sorry. I'm loud anyway. I don't need a microphone. When you were talking about the Department of Treasury, I just want to make sure that everyone here is aware. In there was the OMB circulars, cost accounting principles, which is a new super circular. They did away with the A122 and all the others, and now it's a huge super circular. In there, nonprofits who take federal money, from what I understand, have to have either an indirect rate approved by the federal government, or they have to have a de minimis that they can take for their administration or their indirect cost. And I don't know if there will be any training on this or if y'all have gone to any training on this, but you need to be aware of it because I believe that's going to affect nonprofits' abilities to work with the federal government. The other thing is on capital to operate. This will be, and this is the question, it's a cost reimbursement type contract, so do you have to have operating capital before receiving funds coming from the grants?
To address your first point, you do bring up some good points on the OMB. That is definitely the gospel by which these will be implemented, and this process will go forward. And we have found with our discussions with Treasury that they are absolutely requiring that rate be part of that process because they're requiring it for all their counties also. And some counties have been through this grant process and have even dealt with federal monies, but haven't had to have that requirement of that rate in place. And they're saying it doesn't really matter if it costs you $100,000 to go out and do the study to establish that rate, you need it. So just recognize that definitely will be a requirement. And all of the requirements that are going through the county for their receipt of these dollars are going to flow down to subrecipients. If there are any subawards, they are eligible or they're responsible for meeting all of those same criteria. And I guess the second question, I don't know that there is a defined process in place yet. We've had that same discussion with Treasury, and as of right now, we haven't seen any guidance come forward from them that more clearly defines exactly what that will be. So, sorry. Stay tuned. I guess we expect that we should be getting that answer at some point, but right now they haven't been forthcoming.
There was a discussion previously that talked about linking future awards to existing federal programs, and another way of saying that is the opportunity for entities that are running existing federal programs from whatever federal department, that these funds would be weighted or could be weighted to expand or to elevate existing projects. Is that an approach that you've heard, or can you comment on?
I guess we can comment to a certain degree on it. I think that it's certainly, that is a pathway that can be followed through, if we look at leveraging in the most basic way, certainly taking an existing program that's already been funded and trying to then utilize those dollars and all of the gains that have been brought forward from that project to launch forward into another project is certainly a leveraging pathway. It's going to be up to the applicant again to develop that application that shows exactly how those two benefit each other and how the utilization of these funds now flowing in are going to allow you to step up your game to that next level. So it really becomes how convincing of a story can you tell on the linkage between your existing program and a future program that you might want to be developing from that. That's the best I think I can say to it at this point. I've not seen projects that have followed that pathway be brought forward yet, but I think it's certainly a viable pathway.
Mike, I've been following this process, as you know, for about 2 years now, and I must say your presentation this morning even opened up some issues that we haven't discussed. It sounds like you've shared with this audience today 2 ranking processes. The one after this initial opening of the portal, and another one in the summer of 2016, or spring or summer of 2016. When you just mentioned the 1 through 30 ranking, where do you envision that ranking process that you described taking place?
So essentially, the second evaluation of projects by the Board of County Commissioners, is that what you're asking? When the slate of projects is brought forward from the RAC, in whatever form it is, scored or unscored, the Board of County Commissioners, we're expecting that that's going to happen around fall of this year, that they will first see that list of projects. And then they can take however long it is they determine they need to evaluate that list of projects and determine the criteria that they want to apply, recognizing that it's really not the position of the Board of County Commissioners to be doing, say, the technical evaluation. That's why they have the RAC. They brought in folks who can speak to the technical issues related to all the different criteria for Restore to address those issues for them. So we anticipate that the board is then going to be looking at that slate of projects and trying to make better understanding of how do the project monies distribute across the county districts, where are the projects being implemented, what are the initiatives that the county has that the board is aware of that the RAC isn't really looking at, and how do they align with these projects. There's a variety of different things that the Board of County Commissioners really hasn't come forward and said, this is what we're going to look at to determine our final slate of projects. We just know at this point that they have the final say, and that will occur we're expecting probably fall of this year or early spring of next year, depending on how quickly that process moves.
Could you also explain the importance of the multi-year implementation plan, that actually our funding process cannot move forward until that MYIP is adopted?
Yeah, the multi-year implementation plan is a requirement of the process for Component 1. It is specific only to Component 1, and in order for the county to receive any monies from Treasury, they have to complete at least I think it's a 4 or 5 page application in the guidelines it's one of the documents that I referenced earlier, the guidelines for multi-year plan implementation development. They have to develop that level of information and submit that to Treasury. Escambia County has chosen a pathway that's also available to them through that process, which is to develop a standalone document to support the information that's being put in the application itself. That better defines the process they went through, all of the needs assessment process, and all of the involvement of the public in the process. They're looking at that as really a way to end up with a document that they can then deliver back to the public so that everyone can understand what process they went through. Because if you simply just read through the application questions and submit those, some counties are doing that, but it's not a very public-friendly document or a good way to represent the overall process that you may have gone through in order to finalize the multi-year plan. But ultimately, that multi-year plan, there isn't a requirement as to when that's submitted, but that has to be submitted and approved before monies flow down through Pot 1.
And does the community have an opportunity to give input to your development of that multi-year implementation plan?
We expect that we will, right now as part of our projected schedule, we'll be going through that multi-year implementation plan development. We are required by Treasury through that process again to make that multi-year implementation plan available to the public for, I believe, 45 days. And so that, at that point, is public comment opportunity. So we'll be going through, I think, probably a pretty similar process to the process that we did for the needs assessment and the selection criteria. We made those available through the website. We made them available through printed copy. People could submit comments online, submit them to the website. And then we went through and looked at all of the comments with the county staff, identified how they could best be integrated into that document so that they could represent, the final document could represent the final implementation, not only what the county staff wanted, but represent also the public process.
Yes, sir. How you doing, Mike?
Hey.
I'm Josh Womack, and what I'm trying to wonder is, have y'all went to District 5? I'm seeing y'all in meetings in District 1, 2, 3, and 4. But if we're going to be fair, we're going to be fair from the beginning. And fairness is, if District 5 haven't had a meeting for y'all in District 5 besides you coming out to our meetings, but I think we should have it officially county mandated meeting in a community. Instead of me coming to beg to say, not beg, because I didn't have to beg you, I asked you and you came right on out. But I don't think it's fair to my community that we haven't had a restore meeting in Cantonment. I ain't talking about Beulah, I'm not talking about Molina, I'm talking about in Cantonment where we have a real problem that's been designated as a CRA. And if everybody concentrate like we should, get one thing finished before we keep jumping to another one, because from what I gather, and I've been working in Cantonment for 3 years now, we haven't had a restore meeting in Cantonment or in District 5, if I'm not, mistaken. But we done had a bunch of the Dewberry group come out to our meetings in different functions that we've had. But I'm just wondering when we gonna get a official meeting in Cantonment. Thank you.
The location of public meetings that we have had up to this point are being coordinated through the county staff and also are being coordinated through the Board of County Commissioners. And through their process, we have tried to make sure that we're staying in line with their wishes as far as when information is being brought forward and when the public process is engaged in individual districts. And there has, I would say up to this point, to the best of my knowledge, we have discussed that with the Board of County Commissioners, and the board had opted not to, or at least board members had opted not to engage that public process yet. I expect it's coming, and I'm not sure exactly when, but perhaps one of these meetings that we have coming up might be the opportunity to do that. But ultimately, I anticipate that there will be one or more official meetings of this process in every one of the districts within the county by the time that we're done. I'm not the one that dictates when those things occur. So.
Hi, I'm a faculty member at University of West Florida, and we work with a variety of nonprofits, and plus the university doesn't make profits. So my question is, what kind of organizations are eligible to put in the initial proposals? And secondly, what kind of organizations will be eligible to participate in the procurement process when the county is actually awarding money?
I can address I think the first question perhaps better than the second. The first question, basically the applications can come in from anyone. The county has tried very hard to make this a very open process and not limit who can bring forward ideas, if you want to put it that way. Recognize that the folks who have experience in grant writing, the folks who have experience in grant implementation, the folks who have experience in project implementation on the architecture, engineering, public utility side of things are likely going to have an advantage in the applications that they bring forward because they understand the process better. And that's part of, again, the reason why we're having this meeting is to try and encourage folks who don't know that process or haven't been through that process before to reach out to those groups that do have a knowledge of that process and a history in that process, and recognize that there's some benefit that can be gained in getting their project higher up in the ranking process simply by working with folks who've been there before. On the second, to your second point on who's eligible for project procurement, that really is a county question. While I've worked with the county procurement process and been through that process myself, I can't say that I'm an expert on exactly who all is eligible to come forward. I would say that a lot of that is going to be dependent on the type of project. Certainly from an engineering, a technical project, an environmental restoration project, it's likely going to end up being engineering firms, architecture firms, those types of professionals that do that work. When we get into the arena of projects that are more focused on economy and more focused on tourism, that's an area that's, I think, a little bit grayer in exactly who is the expert to implement that type of work. And some of that process, I think, it can be defined by talking with the county and understanding through their procurement officer exactly what process is going to be implemented in the future. But even that, I think there's probably a broader definition that ultimately will be applied than what we can say based on the rules today. Sorry that there isn't a more definitive answer there. I also might mention that I believe it's a May 4th meeting. The county procurement officer will be at that meeting for Restore Advisory Committee. So you might be able to get a better answer to that question at that meeting than I can offer you today.
Okay, well, I was concerned because of your two public meetings. One is for nonprofits and the other's for, I can't remember what you called it, but commercial for-profit organizations, which kind of leaves the university out of the picture. And I just wanted to make sure that wasn't the case.
No, it's certainly not the case. And today's meeting and the planned meeting that's being put together for, I believe, next month for the business community is neither one of these are official public meetings from the county. They're processes to outreach and engage the community and try and bring forward a way for certain folks that we anticipate will want to be part of this process, get them together and get them engaged talking to each other. That's really the intention of these meetings. Correct. And we will have the public workshops that will be sponsored specifically by the county that will take place in June. Those won't be the only workshops that occur. Those two will be workshops specific to the process, the application process. And then we'll have future public meetings that will occur throughout the remainder of the time period that we're working on this. I think in all we'll have 6 or 8 public meetings over the entire 15-month process. But to speak to your point about the university, we are not by any means excluding folks who don't fit into this specific category today or that specific category a couple weeks from now that the chamber is trying to host. This is really just more of an engagement process to try and hit those specific sectors of the community that we thought may need a little bit more assistance in bringing information together, collecting folks together and looking at ways to team through the process.
I'd like to expand a little bit, Mike, on Dr. Benchley's question and also on Doug's about leveraging funds, eligibility. This session is really related to the pot of money, pot 1, the direct allocation to Escambia County. There are other pots. So with regards, I guess, to Doug's question, I know many of you are also affiliated with or have contacts with other federal agencies and maybe other state agencies. There are other pots of money that federal agencies and state agencies are receiving, and you should be in contact with your partners in those agencies. An example of funding that has been allocated already is with the Seminole tribe in South Florida, in the Everglades and in the Tampa area. They've been allocated a lot of money for several projects there through a federal agency. So don't forget about that avenue, as well as this avenue today, which is regards to the direct allocation to Escambia County. Now, specifically with that, yeah, the university is in that, but then don't forget ECUA, City of Pensacola, are also in that kind of gray area, since money comes directly to the county commission to then allocate out. They can allocate out through two means. One is through the county procurement process, just like we do any project we do that would go through county procurement where it's competitively bid. The other option is through a sub-grant award, which the board has still withheld an opinion on whether they want to do that or not, but that could be a direct sub-grant to a receiving agency. The key is that agency still has to comply with all the federal regulations, the Davis-Bacon labor regulations. The project would still be subject to NEPA, as an example, the National Environmental Policy Act analysis. So there's a lot of hoops if there is a direct allocation to a not-for-profit. But that is on the table still. The board initially was not in favor of that, but I think it's back on the table now. So just keep in mind those would be two ways in which the county can allocate, through the Treasury rules, can allocate funds out. I think if I'm forgetting anything there. May 4th, at the Restore meeting, 4 o'clock next Monday at the county chambers, will be a session on the Treasury eligibility and procurement requirements. So that's the federal side of it. The county one won't be until June 1st, I think is the first Monday in June, where Claudia Simmons, our purchasing manager, will then present to the Restore Act Committee the requirements for local procurement. So I would advise you, if you are interested in that, to attend those two meetings, and you will get from a federal expert next Monday, and then from the county expert in June 1st. Thanks.
Thanks for those clarifications, Keith.
Hello, Mike. I just wanted to ask you specifically about George Hawthorne Diversity Program Advisors, specifically about the Transocean money that's available right now through the planning efforts, and what is the process that's going to be laid out for the planning dollars? Because ultimately, as these nonprofits and smaller community groups that have not been involved in the process over the last 2.5 years, they have a catch-up to do. And so are there funds available to help pulling together planning efforts and devising projects within the community area? And what's the process for that?
The planning grant process, I think, has gone through, and the understanding of exactly what is eligible for that within this community has gone through, I think, an evolution from the early stages to where we are now. It's through various discussions with Treasury, it's been made very clear that their expectation for planning grant dollars that are brought forward for approval will only pass down, will only get approved if the planning grant request is a direct relationship to the development of the multi-year implementation plan. There are other planning grant opportunities that will be available through the Restore process in the future. So this isn't the only time, but the Escambia County's application has now taken the form of a very focused application directly on cost reimbursement for the multi-year implementation plan itself. So I don't anticipate that we will have a mini grant type opportunity through that would then reach out to the community and allow folks to get funds to further develop their organizational process to respond to Restore. While early on I think there was an expectation that might be an opportunity to flow through the planning grant, at least at this stage that door's been closed by Treasury and it's not an opportunity right now. I think there's been some discussion at the staff level in the county and perhaps with the board about whether or not that was going to be made available to the public. To my knowledge, at this point, the pathway forward for folks in the community that are looking to try and do that would be to submit a project that looks to develop that through the first round of the multi-year plan, where that is really a planning project. And then future multi-year plan implementations, as we talked about, money will flow in over a period of 5 or 10 years. Then in the second round and the third round, that same planning opportunity could have positioned you to then develop a project or a culmination of projects to be brought forward as applications in the second or third round. I don't know that, other than in concept, that there's really been any more thought process put forward into that. But certainly, if that's something that you're interested in doing, there's an opportunity to look for partners in this room today to try and bring that together, and then engage the county at the times that you feel are appropriate, where you're bringing your partners together to determine what's the best way for you to develop that and bring it forward as a project. I'm sure the county staff will be more than glad to help you address those issues.
I think we have one last question.
Good morning. I'm Bruce Watson with the Early Learning Coalition. I've noticed sitting in the room there are quite a few not-for-profits that represent what I call health and human services. As I look through the criteria, and I sat through these assessment needs development process and many of your meetings for the past 6 months, and while in the special needs, I think we did a good job, or in the needs assessment, we did a good job of coming up with the social needs. All of those ended up pretty much in the bonus criteria, that the bread and butter, meat and potatoes of this is really hard economic, particularly at the adult level, tourism, things of that nature. Do those of us who deal with children and underserved communities really stand a chance of putting together anything that meets the initial criteria? Because most of our needs are met in the bonus criteria, which means we have to have something to get in the door in the first place.
Mm-hmm. It's not the first time that I've tried to address this question. It is interesting that when they were writing the eligibility criteria that were eventually brought forward for the Restore Act, the educational component, whether it was environmental education or early childhood education, simply wasn't spoken to directly. I take that to mean that it's not it doesn't make it an ineligible criteria. What it does, though, is it establishes a challenge for folks who want to try and promote an educational project to somehow link that project to one of the eligible criteria. So understanding how early childhood education might then work into workforce development, or might work into another criteria that is specifically listed. That's the best advice that I can give you at this point. I agree, it is a challenge in that education in and of itself was not directly addressed by the criteria. So the best thing we can do is look to the criteria that are there and understand that the intent of the criteria, when they were originally codified, were trying to be as broad as possible. And the Pot 1 monies, unlike Pot 2 and Pot 3 and some of the other monies that are flowing to state agencies and coalition right now, that are dictated specifically for environmental investment and environmental recovery. The Pot 1 monies is that unique animal within this group that is supposed to be a broad spectrum of different elements that are represented and brought forward as projects that address not just oil spill recovery. So if there is an opportunity within Restore to address early childhood education, I think Pot 1's the area to do it. It's just how do you bring that together to develop that convincing story, to get an application that's highly considered by the RAC and eventually by the Board of County Commissioners.
Great, thank you. And yes, thank you, Mike. Anastella. The one comment I'll just make, because that's kind of my focus area too, is if best available science is what's going to be used to make that business case link between the project idea and the return to the community, we're all, Bruce, you particularly, very aware of the best available science around where early childhood education investments return the greatest ROI to a community as a whole, not just looking at education, but other costs of community, particularly for dropouts. So we might want to think about that. Thank you so much. I found that to be very informative and made lots of notes, as well as I know you all did. I would like to mention that throughout today, we will have these folks with us so we can have additional questions, because I know it's a lot of information at one time, and additional questions may pop up in your mind throughout the day. So please know that we can bring those up as we move throughout the day. Next on our agenda, let me give you kind of the lay of the land for the rest of the morning. Next on our agenda, we're going to spend a little bit of time hearing from two of our local experts on more details related to the specific needs that do exist in this community, in those areas of job creation and economic development, tourism, and environmental. I know many of you as organizations may focus, and you had to self-select into one of those categories when you registered for this event. We thought it would be important for you to kind of understand the current status. What is the actual status of these, of the key economic indicators and other indicators in those three categories for Escambia County? So that's what we have on the agenda next. We'll then have a break. Following that break, now that you have been shown kind of where we are in the process, what it's going to look like going forward, you understand a little bit more about both those eligible criteria as well as the specific needs that the project ideas would need to address. We then get to your point, sir, about partnership. We have a great speaker lined up for you. Leslie Powell, a senior attorney with legal services, does a lot of work on the collective impact model, which I think, as we hear this morning, is really what it's going to take for us to have kind of systems approach ideas that really do link together entities that might typically work alone to bring about a total solution on one of these three focus areas. So we're going to get to hear from Leslie on collective impact and things that you as an organization might want to think about as you move down that partnership train related to Restore. We then have a working opportunity where we're going to split up into breakout groups according to those three topics of economic and workforce development, tourism, and environmental, where we'll pull you together in smaller groups of 6 to 8 and spend some time really working through, as Mike mentioned, not the actual project application, and it's not an application, it's an idea submittal form, but at least some of the key components that you will need to think through in advance of submitting an idea on the project portal that will be made available in June. So that'll give us a chance for you to get together with others focused on similar topics, for you to really start thinking through and working through those opportunities. We'll then come back and hear from each of the small groups kind of what you discussed, what your thoughts were, and then we will close with an understanding of what are the further opportunities to engage. I think we've all heard May 4th, June 1st coming up, but we'll hit on that again, and then we'll have some opportunity for you to network a little bit further before we end today.